And today me and Andy are going to be walking you through how you can find your unique luxury brand story, which if you tuned in last week, you'll know is a really important part of your marketing strategy, should be a really important part of your marketing strategy going forward. As usual, any questions or comments, you can leave them in the comments below, and we will either come to them as we're speaking or we'll come back to you once this session has ended. Attendees of this session will also be entitled to a free interactive brand story roadmap. So everything that we cover in today is kind of included in that roadmap. It is a fillable document, so you can take it away into your marketing teams and you can begin kind of plotting out how to implement this strategy into your own marketing. And that's something that you can start doing immediately. You don't need any kind of pre-planning. So that will be available to everybody who's registered or is watching this session. So we'll just come back to that at the end and you can find out how you can claim that document. So just really quickly, before we kind of dive into what we're covering off today, just want to recap what we covered in the last episode. Each of these sessions follow on from one another, so it is useful if you can go back, if you've not watched that, go back and watch episode 1 and then come back to this, as we will be tying things back to the previous episodes quite a lot. But just to run through a couple of bullet points here, I mentioned it before. Your brand story is unique. It is the easiest way and the best tool that you have as a luxury brand to differentiate yourself from your competition. If we're looking at very similar products, if you don't have a creative or a unique brand story that you're telling through your marketing efforts, then ultimately the customer is going to think about price and or brand legacy and reputation, or recommendations from friends, which is not something that you can control as easily. So it's going to be one of the best tools in your arsenal, especially as campaigns become more algorithm driven and you have less control actually about how the ad is served. This is the one thing that you can control really well. Investing in a brand story is definitely more profitable than you think. There's been loads of research about the effects of brand building versus sales activation strategies. It will reduce your reliance on promotions because a healthy brand reputation and a memorable story can reduce price sensitivity amongst consumers, which is something that's really important at the moment as we start looking at supply chain complications, increase in tariffs, increase in import and exporting costs. So something for you to really think about from an operational side as well, and logistically, how we can start using marketing to maybe combat some of those issues. And it's something that I talk about a lot, and inevitably we're going to talk about a lot today. Emotion-led stories really are the best thing that we can be using in terms of supporting brand recall, reputation, and long-term growth in comparison to those advertising campaigns that are based on product, promotion, and price. Having something that's emotionally led and story led is the best way that you're going to be able to be memorable to those consumers who may never have heard of your brand before. So that was a very quick whistle stop of what happened last session. To dive into today, how can you find the brand story that's unique to you? And I think this is something, Andy, that we talk about with our clients quite a lot, because they have lots of ideas, which is great, but sometimes they struggle putting that into a cohesive story, or maybe the story that they think they want to tell doesn't resonate or isn't really what their audiences are able to relate to. So it's really important that we as marketers actually take some time to look at what is that unique story that we can tell from beginning to end, that's kind of cohesive. It can be implemented across all of your different marketing channels, and everything can all work together in like this big kind of clock that just keeps turning and ticking over a really long period of time. So this isn't necessarily kind of a single campaign strategy. You can use it as a single campaign, but it's more taking a look at what is that overarching theme, that overarching story that's then going to fuel kind of all of your content, all of your messaging, and how you want to be perceived to your audience. And that can come out, you know, in your Google ads, in your blog content, in your meta ads, TikTok, your organic content, however you want to take a look at it. So your brand story in general should combine these three things. It's why your brand exists, it's your customers' wants and or needs, and then that should be peppered then with emotion. And if you combine all of these three things, we think you're onto a winner. If you have two of those things, that's good. So if you think about why the brand exists and then you have an emotion laid on top of that, that's still memorable. Equally, if you have why the brand exists and your customers' wants and needs, and you're very kind of forthright about that and it's very straightforward, that would still resonate with some people, even if there wasn't that emotion that's kind of laid as a foundation. So we see, I think you could agree with me, Andy, we see a lot of brands that have one or two of these out of the three. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes there's confusion. So brands sometimes feel that they know why they exist, but what they tell customers is different.
Right.
So there's just a bit of aligning needed in almost all cases that we see.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into each of these three topics and kind of explain to you a little bit more how you can go about making sure you have that right information and kind of everything is working together as it should. But in general, if you have these three pillars that you're always coming back to, you can't really go wrong unless the data that you have is wrong. So if we then take a look at why the brand exists, kind of marketing 101 would tell you that a brand exists because, or a product exists in order to solve a customer problem. So, you know, you see a gap in the market, or, you know, you personally need something and you can't find the product that you're looking for to solve that need, therefore you make the product yourself. It's generally kind of what you're taught as a marketer. You could also take a look at a brand that's built on heritage and history. So it might be a brand, and we see this a lot in Britain. You know, the UK as a nation, England as a nation is old, and brands have really stuck around for what is quite a long time. So, you know, it might be that you don't know the inception of the brand, but you know about its history and its heritage, and the brand exists because of that history. And more as we kind of head into the middle of the 2020s, we're seeing a lot more brands now being built out of culture. So, you know, using traditional techniques that are very specific to a culture, or taking a look at, again, history and heritage of a specific location, or kind of race, and all of these different things, and a brand is being built to kind of support that culture and that heritage. So these are just three examples of how you can take a look at why the brand exists. Obviously, you know, there's lots of other things that can go into this, but the main three that we see are these. But when we think about the luxury industry specifically, in general, the likelihood that you're directly solving a customer problem is probably quite small. Luxury is built around desire and aspiration and people wanting your products rather than them directly solving a need. You know, I don't think I know anyone that has, you know, like an actual need for a Birkin, or, you know, a luxury pair of hand-stitched jeans. It's an aspirational thing, specifically with the luxury industry. So I think when we talk about solving a customer problem, that's a slightly more nuanced area. However, we can still look at it in that way, and we're seeing more and more now that brands are coming are coming up through kind of startups, because they provide a more sustainable solution to their counterparts. So the customer problem might be that somebody can't find something that, you know, is vegan, for instance. I know that there are more and more small goods and like leather small goods coming up that are being made with vegan leather out of leaves. There's a specific brand that's making leather goods out of old fire hoses. Loads of different more sustainable solutions. So that could be one way of thinking about it. Like I mentioned before, your brand might exist to bring an element of your culture to the forefront of fashion. So, you know, really designing products that are built on culture and heritage. Again, keeping alive traditional techniques and to honour the heritage of the brand that maybe was established kind of generations ago. So when we're thinking about customer problems, I think we need to look outside of the box of us like directly solving that need, but taking a look at kind of the brand as a whole and what consumers are looking for and how you can answer that call and provide a solution that, you know, they're searching for. So in terms of why the brand exists, think of it beyond the brand exists because we want to make nice clothes, or I had an idea for a shoe. Think kind of beyond that. That might be the genuine reason why you started the brand, but take a look at why the brand's continued, or why you've continued to invest, or how the brand has managed to grow from A to B, and try and maybe backtrack a little bit about, you know, the why, the bigger piece. We talk about the why a lot. You know, why should your audience care that you're here? Which is an interesting question, because it brings in that audience. So you're not talking about yourself anymore. You're talking about why you exist for the audience. Why should the audience care that you're making these products? Which brings us on really nicely then. I'm going to hand over to Andy to talk a little bit more about audience and your customers' wants and needs.
Well, it's an interesting transition, really, because the customers' wants and needs are really can be quite subtle, particularly in luxury fashion. You've already mentioned it, that really it is a want to buy rather than a need to buy. You know, if you need to buy, there are solutions that are significantly more cost efficient than, you know, a pair of £500 jeans or a £2,500 flight case. So we use a phrase for lots of our clients, and it works really well as identifying a problem, if you like, or an aspirational problem, should I say, for the luxury space, and that is transformation. So when you're looking at customers' wants and needs, often they don't need a pair of jeans, but often they aspire to something different, or aspire to something that they haven't got now. And one word that we use is transformation. Now, giving you an example of this is, you sat in a cold London office in the middle of winter, and you've just got soaked coming off the tube heading into the city, and you've got a 12-hour day ahead of you when the same rain is there for your departure home, and you get in at 9 o'clock at night, and you sit down and you sort of take a big exhale of breath, and then you're served an ad with a bright sunny background, with somebody sat on a beach, maybe having a cocktail, looking like the most relaxed person in the world. What that ad has done is has transformed that person away from the place that they are at the minute, where they potentially don't want to be, and you've moved them into a separate place. Now, clever marketeers ask their customers and deduce from those questions what those points of transformation are and what those subtleties are. And then they start to create marketing campaigns around that and tell stories around that. So that example of cold London office to a sunny beach somewhere is a really basic example of understanding your customer and where they want to be, rather than in central London doing 12-hour days in 3 degrees being soaked through. So, but it's how do you get there? Now, most brand teams sit there and you know, ignore some of the most basic tools that they have in our experience. first-party data, which is your customers' data, is sitting there in your Shopify account, in your Magento account, in your back-end data, wherever else. And most of the time, you've already gone through the double opt-in process or an opt-in process of some description. So you are free to send them an email unless they unsubscribe. So why not ask them things? Ask them carefully worded questions covering lots of things. I'll give you some examples in a second. And that will gradually uncover pockets of aspirations of where they want to be, or what they're struggling with, or what motivates them, what they like, what they don't like, specifically about your brand, but also about their general personality and what they like and what they don't like. So things like surveys, customer surveys, are really inexpensive and really valuable. I'll give you an example of one we sent out in a second. Also look at what, if you've done your persona work, which I would imagine most brand teams have done, marketing teams have done. If you've done your persona work, you'll know exactly who your customer is, and there'll be 3 or 4 personas that you've got printed out and put on the wall somewhere. Now, there will be some sort of industry report that tells you lots more than you already know about each of those personas. So why not spend some time researching where those areas of information are? Often they're in industry magazines, for example, and use that information to start to inform what you do and what you say, particularly when it comes to building your story and getting that out there and engaging customers. And let's be clear about why this whole series we've put together is really to do with the acquisition of new customers. So it's great to have everything lined up and all those 3 areas you discussed, Danielle, all of those firing perfectly. But why do we do that? It's good housekeeping. It's what you should do. But 2, when you're engaging with new customers, you've got even less time to engage them. They've got even less patience. And you've really got to deliver that why that you mentioned, Danielle, very quickly and very efficiently. And all of this work that you're doing here in terms of first-party data gathering across many different places will really help to speed up that time and identify exactly what they want to see. So that beach scene, right, we've identified they want to see that, right, let's run a campaign where we start to show new customers that transformation. And the last one there is competitor analysis. Most companies do competitor analysis to see, are we better than them? Are we better than our competitor, or are we worse than them, and where do we want to be? Actually, the competitor analysis should really just tell you where they're heading and what direction they want to go in, to allow you to maybe adjust your sites and fit into your own lane, your own niche, or your own place where you can dominate and own. So, for example, some brands, we'll come on to in a second, have got really clever with tone. So some brands can get away with being funny, whereas other brands are much more serious and want to move away from that. Each of those 2 examples have got their own lane and they operate in, and they should stay in, to a certain degree. But until you look at what competitors are doing, you don't really know where you sit in that matrix. So competitors is well worth adding in as well. So customer surveys, to give you an example, we sent out a survey to one of our clients last year, and we sent it to 600, I think it was a bit more, was it 660, something like that, Danielle, was it?
Well, it went out to essentially their entire CRM database, and I think we got around 650, 675 completed results.
In response. And we put together quite an interesting spread of questions that covered lots of areas. I'll go into a few examples of them. But the general setup of it was that we sent it to the database and we gave them an incentive of 10% off an order. As you fill this survey out for us, we appreciate it takes some time, we'll give you 10% off. I asked the client, I don't think I've told you this, Danielle, I asked the client how many of those codes were used out of the 600. And the answer was 6. So what it tells us is that there's not many people out of the responders, there's not many that will use a code that has a negative impact on margin. But it also tells us that actually your customers are, by and large, quite happy to give you feedback free of charge. These are the ones that are bought in, they know all about it, they might have bought once, twice, 3 times from you in the past, they're on board, and often they want to help. I think sometimes brands think, I'm just going to bother them again with another email because we've sent them this, that, and the other. But a survey is very different. And actually, when it's received, it comes across as you care. They understand they're going to get sales messages if they've signed up for that, but getting the odd message that just sort of checks in on them and says, wonder whether you could help us with this, conscious you bought from us before, be great if you could do this, happy to give you a discount if you fill it in. It's kind of like, all right, so there's a real people behind the brand. So it has sort of branding effects on by sending it out as well. But the next slide just tells us a bit more info about what we sent. This is just a tiny sort of screenshot of the whole survey. I think it was multiple pages, but it covered things like quality, not just marketing angles. We included everything, really. We included things like quality of product. What do you think of it? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it comfy? Is it not? We went into delivery. Did it come on time? Are you happy with it? Are returns a bit of a nightmare? How's things going with that? We asked them which channels they engage with most. So we gave them a list. I think you can see it there, actually, and they could tick them and suggest or put the channel that we didn't list. In fact, in most cases, we added a box for them to add a comment, and actually most of the insight came from the comments in the boxes rather than the answers to the questions. So that's an interesting tip if you're going to do this. But we went into really lots of things. We also went into the motivations to buy. So what is it? Is it our heritage? Is it the fact that we are the original people in this space? Is it the fact that we're based in a certain country and that has, some positive connotations with it as well? The information that came from that, we ran before I put together the forecast for this year based on what channels, what strategies to happen versus the forecast that we were given. And this was one of the single drivers for channels that we weren't visible in, but also for the product teams to take the information and go, actually, right, okay, so we thought those products were the least comfy, but actually our customers are saying that they're the most comfy. And the products that they thought they designed specific for comfort were actually ones that they thought, yeah, they were okay. So it really starts to position in quite a clever way. So that's a super useful tool, valuable tool, and a relatively quick tool. I know you put it together, Danielle, so you might suggest that it's not as quick as you think, but in terms of time invested and output, I think that ratio is pretty high, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the main thing with this is obviously this example, this survey that we sent out kind of covered a lot of bases. So we asked a lot of questions about people's media habits and actually stuff that had nothing to do with the brand at all. What publications are they reading? Are they reading them online or are they buying in print still? What TV channels do they watch? What streaming services are they signed up for? And that kind of helps us in terms of ad placement. And then obviously a lot of things to do with the brand and motivations, and then, taking a look at what kind of content resonates with their current customers. So we covered a lot of ground, which meant it took slightly more planning. But if there's just one piece of the puzzle that you think that you're missing, it can be a fairly quick thing to turn around. It's incredibly cost effective. And as long as you've got the patience to then go through the data and actually, spend some time looking through it and not being biased and actually taking the data at face value and saying, okay, well, we were wrong about this. I think it's a really invaluable piece of work that actually doesn't take too long to plan and execute. I think we left the survey live for like a week. We sent a single follow-up email asking people whether or not they'd done it, and then we closed it. So really, really tight turnaround.
Yeah, and just logistically, it was delivered as a link to SurveyMonkey through Klaviyo. Nice and easy, where the customer's email database particularly was stored. So yeah. So that's the survey. That's how to find what your customers want. Essentially, a big part of that process of understanding a bit more about that. This is an interesting topic, which is emotion. And I think for some reason, I was one of them before I did a bit of research behind emotion as a human behavior almost. Most people think emotion is somebody laughing or crying. And that you sort of say emotion, they go, oh, God, here he goes. It's kind of like, it's quite polarizing, I've found, talking to people about emotion. I think maybe as stiff upper lip Brits, we sort of go, oh, we don't want to talk about our emotions. No, that's not a thing we do, which I get. I think it's a bit of a historic thing, but there are 27 human emotions if you do some research behind it, and it's more of a spectrum than one or two individual feelings. And actually, the feelings is the wrong word, because some of those emotions within the 27 on that spectrum are actually quite mild. They're not as extreme as one end crying and one end laughing your head off. There's lots of sort of variation in the middle. And I mentioned it before about picking your lane. There's nothing worse when you see a brand that all of a sudden tries to be funny that isn't funny. It's, a great example of this is Aldi do some great guerrilla marketing through Twitter, X, show my age there, X, where they'll jump onto other brands and they'll sort of, take the mickey a little bit about what they're doing, or, there's the whole Kevin the Carrot thing, and using that to attack others and whatever. And then you get brands which are a bit more stiff upper lip, like Marks and Spencer's, think we'd better respond somehow. And it always feels a little bit like, somebody's trying to be funny when they're not. So you've got to really try and do the research we just discussed and pick your lane and pick your tone of voice of the brand and stick to it and play around with that and how you use that rather than anything else. So Loewe, if I pronounced that right, I can't say that word, it's Loewe, isn't it? They do the sort of, say, comedy, but the sort of wit side of things really, really well, and they use it quite cleverly. Burberry used the sort of background as British heritage, and sort of, nostalgia is a great word, an example for Burberry, because it, he sort of makes you feel very Golf GTI 1980s, and, you sort of go along with that feeling, which is quite clever, and the designs, I think, are quite clever as well to tap into that nostalgia and the Britishness side of it. So yeah, and note to the bottom, sort of often some male perfume brands specifically, are often looked to be sort of confident and masculine, and that's the sort of the angle that they go down. So why, first of all, it's important to understand what your brand is and what it stands for. And that comes in that first, who the brand is bit that you spoke about, Danielle. And that falls into tone of voice and emotion are quite close, and how you use them. But actually, it's how you deploy that that's actually quite interesting. And are you deploying that? So we've mentioned Loewe and a few other brands here that are doing it quite cleverly, but have you, as maybe an emerging brand, that understood how you use that and how you develop that? Because again, when we're talking about scaling globally to new customers, that is actually one of the tools that shortens that awareness span, and it engages people almost instantly, particularly new customers. So if you nail that really quite well and quite cleverly, and then stick to it and just play around with it a little bit and do some A/B testing maybe until you get to a point where you feel you've nailed it, it really will contribute to your new customer growth.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I do think Loewe is an incredible example of them really knowing their marketing strategy. I don't know who's doing the marketing at Loewe, but in terms of out of the box marketing, they're kind of really nailing it. And this is interesting when you said about competitor analysis, when you brought up that topic before, because I would absolutely say to brands, don't just copy what they're doing. It's very specific and it works really well for them. If you look on their organic TikTok account, they're partnering with some, very specific and very niche creators on that platform. There's one particular video, they've just released one of like a new tote that kind of folds in on itself as part of their new collection. And they've got kind of an older guy who does DIY, and that's what he does on the platform, filling the bag with power tools.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
And it's like, I wouldn't recommend every brand going and thinking like, oh yeah, that we're going to go and do that. That sounds fun. Look how much success they're having. It works because it's Loewe, and they have a very specific kind of out of the box tone of voice. And as I say, they're not making people laugh, but they're quite witty with kind of how they promote their products and the people that they choose to use. But if your brand is not that, and it's a brand that's built on heritage and, being very classic, like Burberry, stick to your lane. Don't feel like you have to do something just because somebody else is doing it. And again, Burberry's latest campaign, I mean, it's full of high-profile public figures, which not every brand is going to have the budget to do. But, you know, it's about being outside in the rain in Britain. And it's something that all British people can relate to because it rains all the time. So, you know, really owning who you are as a brand and you know, not apologizing for it and really kind of going for it, I think is the best way to do it. And I know that it's not a luxury brand, but I highlighted this last year. Tetley, the tea brand, did a really great campaign for their cold infusion tea bags. They did, I think it was like a suite of 6 different videos in 6 different scenarios, and it was asking people to take a breather and just relax. And it was done in such a perfect way. So if you want an example of how things don't need to be mad and crazy and out of the box and expensive and complicated, I would suggest people just YouTubing that campaign for cold infusions. It's so simply done, but it works so well.
Brilliant. So when we get to the point where we've understood why the brand exists and you've understood what your customers' wants and needs, and you've applied your emotion to it, and the free resource, downloadable resource that Danielle will tell us about in a second, will guide you through this. But once those 3 things have ticked, you're then into the place where you've got to then decide, okay, let's execute some creative that's based on those 3 key things. The one advice that we always suggest is that there's sometimes a disconnect between creative parts of marketing teams and the data parts of marketing teams, where performance marketing rules or creative rules, or there's nothing in the middle. So what we always suggest is to run, I mean, we've called it quick and dirty testing there, which is basically what it is, but it's relatively low cost. 1,000 impressions, 2,000 impressions, you know, maximum to get a winner. Run a small meta campaign, for example, are good at doing this, particularly visual creative tests. Run a meta test over, let's say, 2 or 3 days, or however long it takes to gather 1,000 or 2,000, and run some different tone of creative, or run some different, something left field that you think there's no way that's going to work. As long as it sits within your brand and sits within your 3 sort of stable points we've just been through. Play around with different types of creative before you decide, right, let's go and put X amounts of £1,000 a month into this particular campaign. Lead your creative decisions based on lots of little micro tests, so you get a really good feel for whether something's going to work or not, rather than just putting something together in a lab almost and launching it immediately. And you can use things like previous campaigns to guide those tests, what tended to work well in the last campaign you did, what didn't work so well. Again, use the first-party data gathered from customers and from your research. And then put together something very simple. Meta allows you to do lots of tests very simply, very cost efficiently, very quickly, and allow that to then lead into what you should develop. Sometimes when campaigns fall over a little bit is when you deliver your creative to agencies. They haven't seen it before, they haven't played part in it, and they get a file that says SS25. And the first time that they get to see it is when they click on that button to open it and extract the file. So get them to do lots of little tests. Say, I'm thinking about going in this direction. This is what the product looks like. Can we do some tests before we actually launch? And we're talking matter of days or weeks, not matter of months or quarters, to be able to get you some real interesting feedback. And that's got to help growth in terms of revenue. It's certainly got to help growth in new territories when your brand awareness will be almost zero in some territories, and you've got to do a much heavier lifting job to get the needle moved in new places. Definitely the ability to understand that market through testing isn't valuable, it's essential, I would say. And then lastly, there really is, sometimes as marketeers, we don't always operate outside of the wider marketing team, where our customers lie outside of our marketing team in most cases. So ask people on the shop floor, ask the CEO, ask your neighbours, do surveys in the streets. We've done that before for brands actually many years ago, but we used to stop people and ask them questions, which is kind of similar to the customer survey bit that we went through. But sometimes when you're so focused on the task at hand and you believe and you live and breathe the brand and you've done loads of work on it over the last sort of 2 or 3 months to get this campaign in a particular shape, ready to launch, you've done all your branding and your customer surveys and you know which emotion or emotions you're going to run with, sometimes you can find yourself going down a bit of a rabbit hole that might not be the right direction. So just as a sense check, just ask outside of the place that you have most of your conversations, which normally is a marketing team. Particularly if you're the one that guides the strategy and you're the ultimate responsibilities of heads of e-commerce, heads of strategy, heads of marketing sort of roles, marketing directors. If it sits at your feet, there's no reason why asking outside of your immediate team for some feedback is the right thing to do. There's no reason why that's the wrong thing to do, for sure.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, I'm a big advocate in kind of involving customer services teams, whether that's people that are on the shop floor, whether that's people answering questions through your website or dealing with returns or complaints. I know complaints is quite a dirty word, but sometimes it can really offer you insight into what you maybe shouldn't be talking about. If your marketing strategy is talking all about, comfort or all day wear, but your shoes you've got complaints from your customers about how a pair of shoes has shredded their feet, maybe you don't want to talk about comfort. If you've got particular people that are constantly asking the same question through your website, I'm looking for this particular product, is it still in stock? When's this coming back in stock? Or I'm looking for this specific product in this specific color. Do you have it? That can give you real insight into actually what people are looking for. So I would urge you to, take half a day and just, pick some people from your customer services team and just sit them down and say, like, what is the conversation with our customers? Like, what are they talking about? What are they asking? What are they complaining about? And that won't just be beneficial for marketing. I think it will be beneficial for everybody. So that would be kind of my one piece of advice in terms of looking outside of the marketing department.
Yeah, one last really interesting, which is reminding me of an example from an Indian takeaway. I'm going to give the example. We can cut it out the final edit, but I'm going to give it anyway. The way to look at the complaints is actually learning points, isn't it? So if somebody says the sandals aren't comfortable, lots of brands go, oh, how do we get rid of the review? Or, oh, that's terrible. Whereas the correct response is, brilliant, thanks for the feedback. We'll do something about that. And my Indian takeaway example was, there's a new one that's by us, and I thought, well, before, it's been open for about a year, and I thought, I won't go just yet. I'll look at the reviews for Friday night's tea sort of thing. So I'll look at the reviews before I go there. And it's actually been open for longer than a year. So there's lots of reviews, but it's under new management for the last 12 months. And there was feedback before these guys took over, which was, worst curry I've ever had in my life. Very bland. Chicken wasn't great. It was absolutely flying at it. And they responded by saying, thanks for the review. Appreciate the feedback. We're under new management. We've actually changed the recipe and we've sourced different locally produced chicken. So please come back and try the new recipe out. And I just read it and I thought, what a really, really clever way to accept that someone has a problem, to do something about it, and almost at the same time show everybody else we've done something about it and we're better because of it.
Yeah, and I mean, we've spoken about kind of community management quite a lot. So if people have questions about community management, you can get in touch with us in terms of kind of best practices with how to deal with things like that. But yeah, great example. Not very luxury though, Andy.
No, it's not very. Well, this is a luxury Indian though, to be fair. That's so true.
Perfect. Well, we've come to the end of kind of the main bulk of this session. Hopefully people have found it interesting in terms of an introduction and getting kind of the wheels turning and your brains kicking in with assessing what your current strategy looks like now, and is this something that you're implementing? And is this something that you can start developing over the next couple of weeks or months, or if it's something that has to come in for H2, then that's great as well. I mentioned it at the start, and Andy mentioned it here. This session comes with a free resource, which actually helps kind of take you through this journey. So it looks like this. It's our luxury brand roadmap. Everything's broken up into different sections, so it gives you prompts in terms of how to identify your customers and what they care about. It gives you an opportunity to think about your brand's history, how customers or yourselves would describe your brand. And then there's an example in there in terms of how you can then use that data to then find an emotion and link that to a customer need, and then produce a creative theme off the back of that. It's very straightforward, but I think it just outlines things really nicely in terms of the different stages that you have to go through to get to the end result, which is a really coherent and consistent brand story. So we'll be sending this out. Well, I'll be sending this out automatically to anyone who has registered for this webinar. Anyone that's watching on demand or on catch up, it will be available for you through whatever platform it is that you're watching, whether that's directly through our website or through YouTube. So please download it and use it, share it with your wider marketing teams. And as always, if you need any support, we would love to hear from you. This is the work in particular that I love doing. So, come to us with any questions, and we'll be happy to help. Thanks everybody for watching. Hopefully we will see you next month, where we talk about essentially how to then implement this story across multiple channels. So take a look at this first in the next couple of weeks, and then hopefully we'll see you towards the end of March, where we will then talk about how you can take that and start using it to acquire new customers. Have a nice day, everybody, and we'll see you soon.